Work together to decarbonize your economies and reverse the impact of global warming in Daybreak.
And today we'll be teaching you how to play Daybreak, game designed by Matt Leacock and Matteo Menepas, and published by CMYK.
And hello everyone, it's Stella.
And Tarrant here from Meeple University.
Alright, let's get to the classroom.
In Daybreak, players are the major political and economic powers of the world, working cooperatively to try to reverse the impacts of global warming. With each player playing as a single geopolitical power, each round players will use the cards they draw from the decks to upgrade or change their actions, to reduce the emissions of their own economies, manage the resilience of their societies, and, where their actions allow it, work collaboratively to solve this global issue. Each round, players compare global emissions to global sequestration, resolve the impact that any excess has on the global temperature, and deal with the increasing number of crises which these temperature increases will cause. If players can collectively reach a position of net zero CO2 emissions, they will win the game. To set up, lay out the main board with the round marker at 1, the dice and temperature strips in the thermometer, and the 6 planetary effects markers in the starting locations of their tracks. Each player will choose a geopolitical power to play. These are not all equal. Europe is the easiest of the powers to bring to a net zero economy. Then is the US, then China, then the majority world. As such, turn to page 35 of the rulebook and then, based on the difficulty of game you wish to play, choose and distribute the specific combination of world powers shown. Here we'll use the standard difficulty 2-player mode using China and the US. Each player takes and assembles the matching player board and uses the help card to set up their starting economy and society. The top row will show household energy demand. Here there's a total demand of 6, which is met by 4 high emissions power stations and 2 green power stations. Below that is a row for your other high emissions sectors. Here there's 2 industry, 1 agriculture, 5 transportation, 2 from buildings, 1 from fuel extraction and 1 from waste. Each grey token is a source of CO2 emissions which you'll be trying to reduce across the course of the game. These 3 boxes represent your resilience. Here I begin with 1 ecological resilience and 1 infrastructure resilience. These represent how much crisis and unrest your society as a whole will be able to endure as things go wrong throughout the game. On the right-hand side is a section for communities in crisis. China, for example, begins with 1. Through the game, players need to manage their societies without creating too many communities in crisis. Any one player completely filling up this box is one of the ways to lose the game. Each major power has 5 corresponding starting cards, and each player should take these and put them in any order in the 5 slots above their player boards. In the game, net zero emissions can be produced either by producing fewer emissions or by sequestering the emissions produced. And that will be done with these tokens: trees, oceans, and direct air capture. Based on your chosen setup, determine your number of starting trees and oceans and place them on the main board. It doesn't matter where. Keep the rest available for later use. Shuffle the 3 decks of cards: global projects, local projects, and crises. You're now ready to play. Daybreak is played in a maximum of 6 rounds, and each round is played in 5 stages: the global stage, local stage, emissions stage, crisis stage, and growth stage. In the global stage, you'll set up for the round, choosing a global project which the players may try to use, and forecasting what crises might befall you at the end of the round. In the local stage, all players gain cards from the local project deck and use them to take actions. There's no turn order to do this. All players get their cards at the start of the phase and can do their actions simultaneously or in any order. These actions are generally spent to build resilience, build sequestration, and reduce the CO2 emissions of their economies. Third is the emissions stage. Every grey token a player has on their player board produces emissions. Emissions are sequestered as best they can be, and remaining emissions move to the thermometer where they cause temperature increases. Fourth is the crisis phase, where, based on how high the temperature has gone, you'll resolve planetary effects and crisis cards, which will test your resilience and may take you backwards on your path to net zero. And finally is the growth step, where you'll move to the next round, which includes an increase in energy demand as your population grows. There are 3 ways to lose the game. These are if any player ever gets a 12th community in crisis, if the top step of the thermometer is ever filled, or if you haven't won the game after 6 rounds of play. To win the game, you must reach the point of drawdown. In the emission stage of a round, you must have strictly more sequestration capacity than you have emissions, meaning there must be at least 1 sequestration token left open after distributing all of this round's emissions. Having reached drawdown, you must then still resolve all of this round's crisis cards, and if you resolve them all without triggering another lose condition, then you win the game. So now let's look at each phase of a round in detail. First is the global stage. Check the number of crisis cards showing next to the current highest band on the temperature, draw that many cards, and flip one of them face up into the forecast crisis slot, putting the others face down. You'll face these crises in this round's crisis phase. There's no limit to the number of unknown crises, just keep adding them above the board if you need above 4. If you have ongoing crisis cards from previous rounds, those do not occupy these slots. The new cards are placed in addition to any existing crises. Then the team draws and looks at 2 cards from the global project deck and chooses which one they wish to keep, adding it to one of these global project slots and discarding the other. These are helpful cards and actions which the team will be able to use to their positive effect. There may be at most 4 global projects at a time, so late in the game you can either discard the cards you drew, or discard a previous project, as well as any associated cards, to make way for the new one. Second is the local stage. To begin this stage, each player draws 5 cards from the local project deck, adding them to any cards they carried over from a previous round. This number is reduced by 1 if you have at least 4 communities in crisis, and reduced by 2 if you have at least 8. Now, in any order, and simultaneously if they wish, players may take actions using the cards in their hands and the cards in their tableaus. Your options are as follows. You may take a card from your hand and then play it face up underneath an existing stack of cards above your board, leaving only the circular tags in the top right corner visible. You may take a card and play it face up on top of a stack of cards in your tableau, leaving all the tags from previously played cards visible. You may resolve one of the 5 visible actions in your tableau. There are several ways these can work. Some cards require you to discard cards from your hand to pay the cost of taking the action. Here I would discard any one card to gain a resilience token of my choice and add it to its corresponding box. You can take this action any number of times you can afford. Some cards have a simple action but a limit of taking it once per round. Place a cube to mark that you've taken the action. This is just a marker, it won't count as a CO2 emission. In this case, it would allow me to gain a tree, which I'd add to the board. A large number of the game's actions become more powerful as you make stacks of matching tags. This, for example, is a once per round card, letting you draw 2 new cards from the deck for each incentive icon in that stack, and keep any which remove your grey tiles, discarding the rest. So here I would draw a total of 4 cards, look through them, in this case keep those ones and discard these ones. For this action I could discard a card from hand, to close down a dirty power plant for each regulation icon in the stack. Here it's 3. So I'd remove 3 dirty energy from my energy row. Just be careful as you do this. At the end of the round, if you can't meet your country's energy demand, that will cause communities in crisis. Since there is no way to build new dirty power plants in the game, you will need to take actions to build clean power stations to keep up the supply. Some actions can be used multiple times, limited by tags. This one is once per round per innovation tag, so I could take this action at the moment twice. This action also demonstrates one of the cooperative actions in the game. In this case, it's exporting green power plants from this player to another. Unless you have an action like this which specifically allows it, cards, resources and tokens cannot be exchanged between the players. Players should be sure to use these slots as efficiently as possible. If you do place a new action card on the top of a stack, any cubes which were present are discarded. That means you can use a stack and possibly make use of the tags in that stack multiple times per turn. Other helpful effects you may come across include removing these high emissions tokens. These will usually specify a particular type, so here you would remove a vehicle emission token from your row. Unlike the energy row, there's no green version of these, and you don't need to replace them with any given token. You can simply assume that it's been replaced with a more environmentally friendly alternative. Just be aware that often these come with the cost of higher overall energy demand. There are some cards which let you reduce the energy demand of your economy. There are some more powerful cards which can't be used until you have a certain amount of tags in its stack. There are also cards which let you mitigate the effect of the crisis stage head-on, such as ignoring certain planetary die roll effects, revealing some of the unknown crisis cards or letting you discard them, or even temporary temperature reductions to reduce the number of die rolls and crises you encounter. Be careful of this one. It's a risky technology and you'll have to roll the die with the chance of causing more crises instead of fewer. During the local phase, players may use active global projects, or they may take actions to activate them. There are 2 types of global projects. Some require cards with certain tags to be tucked to activate them. And so as an action, you could tuck such a card from your hand under the project. The number required may vary by player count. Other projects are activated once a player has met a certain condition on their player board. Here, it's one player having no more dirty industry tokens. You can mark a global project with the active token to remind yourself once it's active. From then on, any player may use the printed action as if it were one of the cards in their own personal tableau. The last type of action is to deal with a face-up crisis card, either a forecast or a persistent one from a previous round. All such cases are looking for cards with certain tags to be tucked underneath them from your hand. If you tuck enough cards, you'll be able to avoid a crisis happening in this round, or discard a crisis from a previous round, or in some cases reduce the effect of a crisis when resolved without discarding it entirely. Among all these actions, players can take as many actions as they want and can keep cards in their hand at the end of the round if they wish, and once all players are done with actions, you'll move to the emissions stage. Emissions are resolved in the following steps. Firstly, check to make sure that your energy production meets your society's energy demand. For any point of deficiency, add 1 community in crisis. Next, count up your total number of grey tokens. This represents your society's emissions. So here it's a total of 16. You must include all of your dirty power stations, even if you can meet your demand with green energy. This is baseload power, and until it's shut down, it still produces emissions. Add all players' emissions to the recent emissions box of the board. Then start sequestering, moving CO2 onto your trees, oceans, and direct capture. Once all are full, any leftover emissions are moved down to the thermometer, with 5 cubes, or one of these 5 spaces per square, and only using as many columns as your player count. For any row which is now filled, replace it with a temperature bar. If your new bar comes with a new crisis card, draw that immediately. Then comes the crisis stage. First, roll the planetary effects die a number of times based on your highest temperature band. For each roll, advance the matching marker one step along its track. If, as a result of this, you move into one of these tipping point spaces, then resolve the negative effect printed above that track. Some of these involve adding more CO2 to the board, either directly to the thermometer, which could cause you to move up another band for this crisis stage, or in other cases to the recent emissions box. These will be added to your player emissions to deal with in the next round's emissions stage. Some will remove your trees or oceans. This one, for example, is 1 ocean per player, while change in major weather systems adds 2 more crisis cards. If a track has reached its end, any further time that gets rolled resolves the effect again. Then, from bottom to top, reveal if necessary and resolve each of the crises that has been dealt into the game. The icon in the top corner or the text will tell you which player or players the crisis affects. The crises are particularly where resilience comes into play, because if your society is resilient, then it's more equipped to handle these crises. Here, for example, it's whoever has the lowest social resilience who takes 3 communities in crisis. The overfishing card impacts everybody, but how severely it affects you can be reduced by having ecological resilience. Some cards will trigger from other effects, this one for having the most agriculture, this one for having the most regulation, and so on. If ever a crisis applies to the highest or lowest and there is a tie, the players must roll the dice to break the tie. Crisis cards generally require the player to lose something. Here, for example, cards which are discarded from hand or tableau, while in this case it's a loss of resilience. Any time a crisis card tells you to lose something but you cannot, you instead gain 1 community in crisis for each thing you're missing. For a lot of crisis cards, the negative effects will escalate based on how many temperature bands there are on the thermometer. As such, you can expect these crises to become extremely serious as you move deeper into the game. Finally, when you activate an ongoing crisis, if you haven't averted it ahead of time, put it into play and its negative effect will apply from now on until you discard it. This works the same way whether it was a forecast or an unknown crisis. Lastly is the growth stage. Clean up all the CO2 from your sequestration, leaving anything which was placed in recent emissions. Advance the round marker, and all players increase their energy demand according to their player board and help card. This will be by 1 for US and Europe, 2 for China, and 3 for majority world. The latter 2 player boards have a board extension if you need it. The team loses Daybreak immediately if any one player ever gains a 12th community in crisis, or if the 8th temperature band is added to the thermometer. To win, players must reach the end of an emission stage with at least 1 sequestration token left unoccupied, which commences drawdown. You must then resolve the entire subsequent crisis stage without meeting either of those 2 lose conditions. Achieve that and you win the game. Fail to achieve this within 6 rounds and you lose. As shown during setup, you can change the game's difficulty by using different combinations of world powers. You can also change up the setup by using the challenge cards. This gives you a full deck of cards which include positive or negative effects which can apply to one or all players, or even uncertain effects. Deal these out to players at the start of the game. All project and crisis cards have a QR code down the bottom which you can scan to learn more about that particular project or phenomenon. The game can also be played solo and has its own specific solo government and starting set of solo cards. And that's how to play Daybreak.
Thanks so much for watching. Your like and comments are much appreciated. Subscribe to see what's coming. And hopefully you have a wonderful day. See you next time.